So, my name is Melindy Shaffer, but I grew up as Melindy Felicitas Estrada, and I gave myself the nickname Molly because I didn't look Hispanic, and most people can pronounce my first name anyways. My mom is Rebecca Peterson, that's her maiden name, and she married the man who raised me. I don't like calling him my father, but she married Tony Estrada when she was, I believe she was 17 or 18. She was pregnant with my sister when she married him, and hadn't graduated high school. She actually was pregnant with my sister when she graduated high school. So being raised by the man who raised me, I don't like calling him my father. His name's, like I said, his name is Tony. It was incredibly abusive, beyond what I even feel comfortable talking about, but I will for my daughter. He was physically abusive, mentally abusive, and sexually abusive. And from what I've heard, he was physically abusive and mentally abusive to my mother, Becky, which is why a year before she conceived me, or maybe a few months before she conceived me, a year before I was born, she left him. She tried to, at least. Tony is Hispanic, and I was raised in a Hispanic household for the most part because my mother's family lives in another state. Actually, they live in 2 other states. So being raised Hispanic had a lot of amazing qualities to it. In fact, most of my greatest memories were my Hispanic memories, I guess you can say. Piñatas and fideo, one of my favorite foods growing up. Making tortillas with my abuelita, and just all of the little holidays that we did. The celebrations when we came together as a family were big and fantastic until they weren't. Then if people got a little too drunk, that's when fireworks went off in our family and abuse happened at parties, and I'd have to witness my tios and my dad, Tony, fighting a lot of times over women, like girlfriends and different things. There was a lot of abuse, a lot of fighting in my family, a lot of alcoholism and drug addiction as well. I don't think that has to necessarily do with my culture. I just think it has to do with maybe the culture of my family. Being Hispanic has influenced even the way that I teach, the way that I sometimes can talk. Like, I'm a chameleon. And so when I'm with my abuelita, like, everybody teases me because I'll start sounding more Hispanic or whatever. The kids all laugh at me because I don't speak Spanish necessarily, but I have the accent when I say tortillas or quesadilla or, just whatever, like, it's there. I really loved being half Hispanic, and it was a huge part of my identity. It still is a huge part of my identity, but I remember it being a huge part of my identity, especially in my teenage years. So if I was raised by my mother's side, the biggest difference is I wouldn't have suffered the abuse that I suffered being raised by Tony, and not necessarily his family, but by Tony himself. I don't believe I would have been physically abused, and I would definitely, at least I believe I wouldn't have been sexually abused. I always felt incredibly loved by my mother's side. My mother's mother, my Grammy, she was really warm and caring and always wanted to make sure that I felt seen that I felt loved. I'm closest to my mother's sister, who I call my tia, even though she's not Hispanic, my tia Louise. My kids call her Nana because my mother died when I was 9 months old. I think that's a big reason why I wasn't raised by their side. There was a lot of tension between my mother's family and my father's family because of race. I mean, you're talking about the 70s, the late 70s, there was still a lot of discrimination, racial discrimination. And I know for a fact that my mother's father did not approve of the relationship between Tony and my mom. I don't know if it was necessarily because he was Hispanic or because he was abusive. It could have been both. But because there was so much tension between the families, and because Tony was on my birth certificate as being my father, he is the person who raised me. And we also have to remember this was the 70s, so there wasn't a lot of programs for women. Even if Tony was abusive to my mother, she didn't have options to go out and separate herself from him. She even tried. She tried before she had me. She tried to take my sister and go get welfare and go get help. And they said, you're married, you need to go home and work on your marriage. You are not in a position where welfare is necessary for you. So if I would have been raised by my mom's mom, God, life would have been a lot different. It's hard to even imagine. So, being interracial was rough. I was never Hispanic enough or white enough. I felt like I was in between identities. And so I chose to put my energy into being Hispanic more so than I think I did being, I guess, white. I really tried to identify with one. And when I identified with being Hispanic, because that's who was raising me, was my Hispanic side, I really made it known to people that I was Hispanic. I'm Melindy Calasitas Estrada. And I made that known. And so when people would look at me like, but you look white, I'd say, okay, but I'm not. And I had attitude, a lot of aggression towards anybody who questioned my identity, my heritage. I took ballet folklorico. I was in La Vasalina. Like, I wish I would have spoke more Spanish. That was something I wish I would have done. But like, I really threw myself into my Hispanic heritage because I felt like I needed an identity, and I felt like my identity was broken. I never felt like I fit into specifically Tony's family. I always felt like I didn't look like anybody there. Everybody looked Hispanic. My sister, I feel like she looks more Hispanic than I do, but she looks a lot more like Tony than I ever did. And so because I felt fragmented, I really struggled to put the pieces together, and I grabbed the pieces that were right in front of me, which was my Hispanic culture. My friends would always tease me because they said that I was like trying too hard. And I think a big part of me was, I really wanted to make sense of who I was. And I knew I didn't fit in. I didn't feel like I fit in anywhere. And there's a reason why. My grandmother, my mother's mother, my Grammy, she came down from Wisconsin for my wedding. And her and my grandpa, my mom's dad, they decided that it was time to tell me that Tony was not my father. And I remember just going into shock. Like, what? This is like 2 days before the man is supposed to walk me down the aisle. I've gone through all this abuse, and you're sitting here telling me that you've known all this time that he's not my father. I did not take it very well. And in fact, I did what I tended to do. I buried it. I buried the pain, I buried the frustration, and I just did not want to go down that road, because then the only identity that I had carved out for myself, which was my Hispanic identity, you're trying to take that from me. And I held on to it, like clawed into it. Like, how dare you come 2 days before I'm getting married and tell me that the one piece of myself that I own isn't mine. And I think that the hardest thing was my abuelita wouldn't be my grandma. So for about, I don't even know, 10, 11 years, I did not want to deal with it. I didn't want to talk about it. If anybody brought it up, I would literally tell them to shut up. I don't want to talk about this. Like, how dare you bring that up? You don't have the right to tell me who my father is. And I got remarried to Hannah's father, and he's an amazing man. And last year, I finally started asking those questions, like, who am I really? And really dealing with the abuse that I had gone through, going through counseling. So I started writing a book series that's fiction that kind of mirrored what I'd gone through growing up, but it wasn't entirely my truth. I guess what I expected, I don't know exactly. I think part of me was like, oh, I'm Hispanic. And there was a part of me that hoped Tony wasn't my dad. Because then my son wouldn't have my abuser's blood in him. But then there was part of me that hoped he was my dad. Because then I would be Hispanic. And my abuelita, she would be my grandma. And my sister would be my full-blooded sister. And I'd still be able to keep that part of my identity. And so I was really conflicted before I got those results. I really did not know who I was again. And it was a really big struggle. So the day that I found out that Tony wasn't my father, that I wasn't Hispanic, I remember sitting in the car for a long time. Everybody else went inside, and I kind of lost my shit. And then I pulled it together. My best friend helped me a little bit, and I went inside, and the first person I saw was my daughter. I saw Hannah sitting on the couch, and she was playing something on her phone or looking up something on her phone, and she just looked up at me, and she knew, and she opened her arms to me. I remember just like she dropped her phone and she was like, come here. And she hugged me, and I remember just repeating over and over again, I'm not Hispanic. Abuelita's not my grandma. And I felt like a child in that moment, because I really was. Like, that identity, I went back to like a really broken place. And Hannah, I remember her looking me in the eyes and telling me, you are Hispanic. That is your culture. And regardless of what happens with you finding your real dad or not, you have family here. We love you, and you matter, and you're seen, you're known, you're loved, is pretty much what I got from her. So I remember not really having this big urge to find my father, because I was really pissed off. But I don't know, like a day later, I remember talking with my husband and saying, okay, I think I'll try to figure out who he is. I'm going to try to give him the benefit of the doubt, because he may not have known that I existed, even though I felt like that was like not real. Like, I felt like he had to know I existed. I'm a very cynical person and pessimistic, and so my go-to was he left me. And I didn't want to believe in anything positive at that point. So it took my family, my kids, and my husband to really press into me that he might not have known that I existed. So I reached out through Ancestry DNA to my cousin, who is his cousin, and asked her if she would set up a meeting. So Bill Covell, the man my mother left Tony for before I was born. And I found all this out by doing research, talking to my tia Louise, my mom's sister, and also meeting a cousin named Patricia. Patricia actually got me in contact with Bill, but it took Bill a couple days to message me. And so on the 3rd of January, I remember driving home with my husband, and I hadn't heard from Bill, so I pretty much said, fuck him. He doesn't want to be a part of my life. I have enough people in my life who love me and want to be a part of my life. So if he doesn't want to be a dad, not a problem. He could just be a sperm donor. And I remember being really cynical and bitter and angry. And I am using these terms because it's literally, that's authentic. That's what I said. Like I didn't say forget him. I didn't say, oh, you know, screw him. I used the proper terminology that I just used. So, and then on January 4th, I woke up and I grabbed my phone and I was looking at messages, and I had a message from Bill. And it said, wow, this is shocking. I am up for a phone conversation if you are. And I knew in that moment he didn't know. And I felt guilty, but at the same time relieved, because then that meant he didn't leave me there to be hurt by Tony. And so we contacted each other, we talked, and DNA is a trip. DNA is a trip because I sound like the dude. I was looking at pictures. He looks like my son, or my son looks like him, and we have the same nose. I never knew who this belonged to, and it's Bill, my dad, my bio dad, and it was pretty rad because he decided that I'm jumping into this. I got a daughter, and he had no other children, and I have a daughter and I have grandchildren, and I'm coming out to see you. And so we met at the base of Mount Rubidoux, and when I met, it was like a piece of myself that I didn't know was missing was finally put in place. So that identity that I was always searching for, it was like, this is it. This is who I am. It was rad. The fact that I'm not Hispanic initially really hurt. I mean, it still hurts me to this day. But finding Bill, and then finding the rest of my Covell family, my Aunt Kim, and being friended by all these people, and if we would have known, and they didn't. Having plans, like I have a father who wants to be my father now, who doesn't want to hurt me, who doesn't want to manipulate me, who doesn't want to harm me. So a lot of that was made up, and I'm really interested in finding out more about my biological father's side, and his race and his culture, and what life was like for him, and how that connects to me. But I am still struggling with, am I Hispanic? Because I'm not Hispanic by blood. And I think I've come to the point where, yeah, I'm Hispanic. Even if it's not through DNA. Because my abuelita will always be my abuelita. And my cousins, my primos, my tia and tios, they will always be my aunts and my uncles. And I still make killer beans and killer enchiladas, and we celebrate the way that I've always celebrated. So I guess race for me and culture, it comes down to how you, in my opinion, how you're raised. And even if it's not your blood, even if you find out like when you're 38 that you're not Hispanic after all, it doesn't define your culture. Family for me is more than blood. It is connections. It is memories. I treat pretty much everybody that God places into my life, like family, like somebody who could be family. In the end, I wrote a book. I just finished a memoir about finding out all this craziness, this chaos, and how I was able to overcome or to deal with it or to just make sense of it all. And it's called Broken Beauty, Life After the Beast, and it should be going on submission with my agent hopefully next year. So keep you posted. Thank you.